As we turn to our text this morning, most people in here would agree that when it comes to marriage, and more specifically when it comes to divorce, things have seemingly gone off the rails a little bit. Maybe that's the best way to describe it. In fact, it's one of those things that if I asked you if you had a divorce in your family, have you had a divorce in your extended family? Are you a child of divorce? Do you have a sibling or a cousin or someone who's divorced? Every single person in here would be affected. There's just no one who says there's been no divorce anywhere in my life. It is a thing that has drastically affected all people. We've all heard the stats, 50% of all marriages fail. And that's actually true. Because every time I look at this, I think that can't certainly be true, but it is. Now, I should say that first marriages don't fail at 50%, but second and third marriages fail at above 50% and drag down the whole kind of percentage to where 1 in 2 couples total who say I do, Christian or not, it shockingly doesn't make a difference, will end up divorced. Now, for some in this room older that were around and cognizant around the 1970s, you'll remember something called no-fault divorce coming in. A governor by the name of Ronald Reagan was the first governor who happened to be divorced to sign something in the state of California that allowed for something called no-fault divorce. And before this, you had to show cause of why you were getting divorced. And what it led to was a lot of people lying under oath. Well, she cheated on me, he hit me, he did this. And so the reason for no-fault divorce was to try and get people to stop lying. And what we said was, you can simply come to the court and say, we have irreconcilable differences. We would like to be divorced. And now in all 50 states, no-fault divorce is a thing. You can simply go to the courts and say, we don't want to be together anymore, and the court will proceed to dissolve your marriage, or you can dissolve it and present it to the court, and they will agree upon it. And I bring this up because, believe it or not, that's actually what was asked of Jesus some 2,000 years ago. You probably wouldn't expect that this morning that the Pharisees are going to ask Jesus a question about this idea of really no-fault divorce. Can a man divorce his wife for any reason? No fault. But that's exactly what we're going to see in the text today. We have a lot before us this morning. We're going to be in Mark chapter 10, verses 1 through 12, and this is the only section of text we have today. We don't have to kind of jump around and piecemeal a section together. So the text will be on the screen if you have your Bible, Mark chapter 10, verses 1 through 12. Quick side note, we do have children's Bibles back in stock at the Welcome Center as well as adult Bibles, so if you need a Bible, please check there at the Welcome Center. We want to make sure that everyone has a Bible, child, all the way through adult, so make sure that you have a copy of the Word of God, and we'd love to come alongside you with that. They're at the Welcome Center. Let's read the Word of God together. Jesus left this place and went into the region of Judea and across the Jordan. Again, crowds of people came to Jesus, as was his custom, and he taught them. Some Pharisees, a religious group who liked to test Jesus, came and tested him by asking, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason? That's kind of read into the text, and if you were to look over in Matthew where he records the same exchange, it's recorded. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason? What does Moses command of you? Jesus replied. They said, the Pharisees replied, Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send his wife away. It was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote that law, Jesus replied. But it was not but at the beginning of creation, God made male and female, and for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they're no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. When they were in the house again, the disciples asked Jesus, and he answered them, anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her, and if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery. So Jesus is teaching and preaching. This is a common theme in the book of Mark. And some Pharisees come up, and the text says that they begin to test him. And the test might not seem super obvious right away. How is it a test to ask Jesus, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason? Well, the test comes in the same way it does today. There are those who heard divorce this morning and were like, oh boy, here we go. And just in Jesus' day, divorce was a touchy subject. So the test comes in as they're trying to trap Jesus into a controversial issue. They're trying to get Jesus to step on a landmine in front of a lot of people. So they begin to test him because they asked this kind of line, is it lawful? And you got to think Jewish law, Old Testament law, not Roman law. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason? If you want to see more, again, Matthew wrote that in. And the reason this any reason is implied is because adultery, the husband or wife stepping outside of their marriage and sleeping with another person, that was always understood as grounds for divorce, as a covenant-breaking act. And so the reason they didn't need to ask that, so to speak, it's the extra stuff. For any reason, outside of adultery, essentially, they're trying to trap Jesus and saying, what are your thoughts on no-fault divorce, Jesus? Knowing that there would be a mixed bag of opinions, likely in the crowd around him, to get Jesus to respond to a controversial subject. And that's why Jesus responds the way he does. He asks them, you tell me the law. He doesn't answer the question. He says, what does Moses say? To which they respond, essentially, Moses allows for it. As long as a man, and you have to remember, a woman had no right to seek a divorce in this day and age, so this was a law particularly with men, that's it. As long as a man gave his wife a certificate and he could claim adultery, he could claim whatever, and he sent her on her way, they were allowed to be divorced. He was allowed to take a new wife. That was the law. But Jesus says something very interesting in response to that. He says, this was the law. A man can divorce his wife, but then he says in verse 5, it was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote this law. Hear this, church. The law on divorce was a law of concession, not intent. That the intent of the law was not so that people would divorce and give their wife a certificate and send her on her way. The intent of the law, it was a concession for the people, not the hope or the goal. It's going to become important for us today. Moses allowed it because hearts were hardened and likely people demanded it. But it wasn't intent. Jesus goes on to then remind him what was the intent of marriage all along. So he says, that was concession, not intent. And let me remind you the intent. The intent was for a man and woman to leave their father and mother. So that signifies that they would be grown-ups, that they would be adults on their own, to leave their father and mother and form a new family. That this unit would become together, two becoming one spiritually, emotionally, and physically. They would be one, quite literally. Not that they would cease to be individual people, but that they would become a new unit where they must no longer be considered as one individual person, but one, a collective of two. Beyond that, Jesus points to the union as something God has joined together. He says because these people were supposed to leave their father and mother and become one with one another, they were supposed to become one spiritually, emotionally, intimately, that they were going to be husband and wife and that they were made for one another. Therefore, because all of this is true, therefore, what God has joined together, we should not separate. That is the intent of marriage, he redefines to the Pharisees. The section ends with Jesus giving further teaching to his disciples, who would have likely been taken back by Jesus throwing the hammer down on this idea of divorce. That divorce was never really a desired option or even a good option, but a concession. You have to remember that marriages did not carry a lot of romantic meaning 2,000 years ago. Marriages for men meant heirs to their estate and workers on the farm. Marriages for women meant they got to eat They were provided for in a society where women weren't allowed to work. And then heirs for them, boys, to hopefully take care of them when they got old. And that might seem very functional, but there wasn't a lot of lovey-dovey feelings some 2,000 years ago. You wouldn't have heard a lot about, I can't live without you, we must be together. So Jesus' disciples are kind of like, huh? What? Jesus is redefining what marriage means even for his disciples who are closest to him, and he's bringing in this idea of this grand picture of what God had for a man and his wife. Jesus, of course, goes on to share that but for adultery, that a man and woman should not be divorced. Now, today we're going to do our best to apply this text to our lives, and there's going to be kind of two separate sections of text this morning. The first one is going to be something that I think, as I wrote this and prayed through it, challenges our hearts more. That it's going to be kind of something that we have to stew on and kind of think about, and how do we define marriage, and what do we think about marriage, and what is two people becoming married? The second section is going to be a little bit more heady. And we're going to try and build a theology of divorce so that you have an idea of what the scriptures say about it and how to think through this complex and oftentimes very painful topic. So we're going to have some heart, we're going to have some head. And I also, as I prayed this week, recognized that oftentimes a sermon on divorce is actually a lot more for married people. And you're thinking, wait, what? Well, if someone's already divorced, that ship in some ways has already sailed. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is the sermon on divorce is for those who are married. Because here's the truth. It's those who are married who are thinking about getting divorced. Right? In this room, we have people who are married. We have folks who are divorced and now remarried. We have folks who are divorced and single. We have married folks who are thinking about getting divorced. We have estranged couples. I think that God has something in this text for literally everyone. What we must begin today as we try and apply this to our own hearts, where Jesus directs the question on divorce. When Jesus is asked about divorce, he doesn't talk about the legality of things. He talks about the intent of what marriage was. When Jesus is asked about divorce, he immediately pivots and says, that's what you guys think marriage is. This is what God established marriage to be. So that's where we'll begin today. And our first point is this. Your marriage is far more than a legal contract or warm and fuzzy feelings. Essentially, the law of Jesus' day and the law of our day, according to the state, says that marriage is a contract with shared assets that can be dissolved if needed. That's essentially what the state of Ohio thinks of your marriage. It's not very romantic. They don't really care. When you go and get a marriage license, they don't ask you your story of how did you guys fall in love? Tell me about that. How did he propose? I'll ask you that when I perform your wedding, but the state wants your money, and they'll give you a piece of paper. And now you can visit your spouse in a hospital. And you've made a contract before the state. And if need be, that contract can be dissolved according to the state and your assets can be split. And if you can't agree on how to do that, a judge will do it for you or a magistrate. That's divorce, at least in the state of Ohio. But Jesus cut through all that. When discussing marriage, what it was meant to be, he doesn't talk about licenses or laws, and he doesn't even talk about the romantic notion of just two people who can't stand to be apart. And they just long to be together so that they run towards marriage and then they live happily ever after with God in their hearts. That's, the married people are laughing awkwardly. Let's be clear. Your marriage has an element of a legal contract. In the state of Ohio, I'm technically not allowed to solemnize a marriage that has not been registered with the state. We could talk about my opinions on that later, but that is the law, that if you were to be married in the state of Ohio, you need to get a marriage license and be two people that are legally allowed to be married. And so there is an element of your marriage that is a legal contract. And I hope there's an element of your marriage that has wonderful love between one another. I hope that more days than not, that love is overflowing in your home. But the truth is, if you asked any couple in here who are currently married or who have been married in the past, how long do you have this overflowing and undying love? Is that something that you live on every day? Do you wake up and see your spouse and just think, I can't live without this person? The answer is going to be no. There's a story I heard from an older couple who had been married 50 plus years. And this gentleman was lamenting the fall of marriages. And he said, a lot of people look at us and say, 50 years, that's incredible. How did you do it? How did you stay in love? And he said, the truth is, we've had 40 years of a great marriage. We had 5 years, decent, it was all right. And we have 5 years of I'm going to kill that person if they look at me again. So he's like, we've been married 50 years, and 40 have been amazing, and 5 have been, okay, and 5 have been, who's calling the lawyer? But he said, thanks be to God, those 5 years weren't all in a row. It was 2 days here, it was a month here, it was 25 minutes here, it was 1 week here, and then the day after that, it was wonderful and blessed. And then the day after that, it was okay. And he said, marriage is a mixed bag. And hopefully you get some good days mixed in with some not so good days. And that's the best. And I thought that was a really unique way of describing the reality. That no one gets to 50 years. And we have a lot of 50-year couples in here and would say every day has been rainbows and puppy dogs. It just doesn't happen. It's not the reality of marriage. So Jesus says that shouldn't be the reality of what you base your marriage on. That's why he doesn't go for the lovey-dovey thing. He redirects and talks about what the initial intent of marriage was, and it was to be a covenant before God of two people becoming one, and telling the Lord and their gathered family and friends, I am this person's, they are mine. And a covenant is different than a promise. I've made 2 covenants in my life, and I don't intend on making 2 anymore. The first covenant I made was in the summer of 2005 in Goshen, Virginia, as I looked up at the Milky Way and told the Lord I'm in. That's how I accepted Christ. I said, well, I'm in, I guess. It was a very intense prayer. And I looked around, and everyone was crying, and I'm like, should I be crying? All right, we'll see what happens. And for every day since then, I've followed Jesus where he told me to go. It's truly been an amazing thing. I don't have a testimony of backsliding or doing other things. Since the summer of 2005, when I heard the gospel clearly presented and I told the Lord I'm in, I've just tried to do what he's told me to do and say what he's told me to say and go where he's told me to go. That's been it. Hasn't been always easy. It's been a little bit like a marriage at times. There's been great times, there's been okay times, and then there's been what did I get myself into times. But through it all, I've honored my covenant. I also made a covenant October 10th, 2009 in Toledo, Ohio to my bride, Becca. I told her that no matter what comes our way, I will stand by your side and I will not leave you, that I will leave my father and mother, and that we will become one and we will create a new home. We will forsake all others, including ourselves, and form a new unit, and that is what we promised and had our pastor, Kevin Crawford, seal before God and our assembled witnesses. That is why we must not have a casual relationship with divorce, church, because we have given ourselves over in the act of marriage to a new type of relationship. For 99%, we entered it freely and willingly. We gave ourselves to that person in that new union, and in doing so, we brought a little piece of the Garden of Eden back to this earth. A marriage that is truly committed to one another. Before there was sin, God made marriage. Adam and Eve were together before sin ever entered. It was a good thing. And when a husband and wife unite with one another, you bring a little piece of Eden back to this earth, something that God created for man and woman before sin ever touched the world, something that God declared good before sin had corrupted all things. When was the last time that you looked at your spouse and thought of your marriage as a gift from God? When was the last time that you looked at your spouse in your union and you thought, we have an opportunity to bring a piece of Eden back to this world and have it grow richly within our home by the way we choose to love one another? When was the last time you looked at your spouse and said, we have an opportunity to be an example of Christ and his church, as the Apostle Paul says, living out this world, our covenant? My guess, if you're anything like me, it's not all that often, if we're honest, because spouses can be really annoying. And I'm one of them. Trust me, imagine living with this. God bless my wife. He leaves his wet towel on the floor, and he's been doing it for 15 years, and you scream and scream and scream. He doesn't hear you. He goes to mow the lawn when you're having company over and you're trying to clean the toilets. You, for some reason, ladies, just chuck cardboard boxes into the garage, thinking magically they'll get broken down and somehow end up in the recycling can, and that the trash just somehow ends up on the curb, that the weeds somehow magically get whacked. And so when we break down yet another Amazon box, and by the way, how many of those come? I'm thinking, why can't you cut the tape off this box? Why can't you put it in the recycling bin? He leaves his socks all over the room. You clump hair all over the shower. The list goes on and on. We could find the foxes in the vineyard that can literally destroy marriages. Because over time, if you and I are not careful and we do not keep the main thing, what will happen is we will look at the other person and one of you will say, I don't know that I can do this anymore. I don't know that I can live with you anymore. I don't know that I love you anymore. And in their mind, it's time to undo the legal contract because the warm and fuzzies are no longer there. Church, this is not the way of the scriptures, and this is not the way of a soft heart before the Lord. Moses says that is because your heart was hardened that we gave this concession. A soft heart before the Lord seeks a different path, and this is why this message is primarily for folks who are married right now, because if you're going to stay in marriage, it is going to be because of the covenant you made before your God and before your spouse. And some days, the only reason you stay is because you are honoring God in that covenant. It is not very romantic, but it is very realistic. And in a day and age where 1 and 2 marriages fail, being the kind of person who says, I made a covenant before the Lord, therefore I will not go. I will forgive wrongs. I will go to counseling. I will work on myself deeply to change for the better. I will do everything that needs to be done because what God has joined together, who am I to separate it? I make the joke often of the old couple sitting on the bench and a younger couple coming and saying to them, how did you make it this many years? Didn't you ever consider divorce? And the old man says back, divorce? Never, never. Murder many times, but never divorce. The idea being, of course, that that's a word that doesn't come in. It's an impossibility for our marriage. So if you're struggling in here, and I know there are couples who are, there's no perfect marriage. It's just degrees of brokenness and degrees of sinners walking towards Jesus. So that I know, and not because I know, but I just can generalize with the amount of people in here. There are marriages who feel like they're doing pretty okay, and there are marriages who feel like they're hanging on by a thread at this point. And I hope that you hear God's word this morning telling you to cling to Him, to seek aid, to keep on fighting for what you said you would fight for. We can help you get godly and Christian counseling. Sometimes marriage counseling is the best thing you can do. Even if you're in a good spot, marriage counseling can be a great thing for you. We recommend, some people like to go, we recommend a Christian firm up near Lima because Mercer County talks, and sometimes people don't like to be seen walking into a counseling office, and I get that. And so we have people that we can resource you to, Christian counselors who can, by the scriptures, guide you back, hopefully, to. But I know there are some in here thinking, I can't. I can't keep going. I said there was a heart part of this sermon and there's a head part of this sermon too. And my last part was overwhelmingly for the heart of what is marriage and how can you recommit to it, and do you see your marriage as a covenant you made with the Lord? But the next part is a little bit of head. It's a little bit of helping you build a theology, because our second point is this: the scriptures do allow for divorce. Jesus just said as much there, and the overarching theme of scriptures, there's more to it. So I'd be wrong if I didn't say this morning. While I think God's desire is that none be divorced and he would rather see people, that's not to say that there aren't marriages that are in that shape. I think God's desire is that he would like to see people changed in an amazing way, to repent and to come back to one another, and see amazing change of couples redeemed by the Holy Spirit, dripping in forgiveness and grace. But the scriptures do outline the few cases where divorce is permissible, and the first is adultery. To become one with another person, to sleep with someone else, is a shattering covenant event. It doesn't mean that you have to get divorced. We have couples in this church, and I have many friends who have had adultery in their marriage and were able, by the grace of God, to find their way back to one another in forgiveness and love and mercy. But the scriptures do say that it is permissible. The next area we see the scriptures talk is in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Paul talks at length about the idea of divorce, and he talks about the idea of having an unbelieving spouse. That you are fully committed to Jesus and your spouse is not. In fact, they're pulling you away from your faith. In fact, they're standing kind of as a stumbling block to your faith. And Paul says if you're able to, stay with them. He actually says your kids will be blessed for it, if you're able to. But if you're not, if they're standing in your way or they're living in such an unchristian manner, you're free to leave. Those are the two cases that the scriptures outline: adultery and an unbelieving spouse. Now, we must walk with a good deal of caution here, because one I've walked through with, I think, 2 or 3 couples now, is physical abuse. And there have been, I believe, wrongly, pastors in the past who say physical abuse isn't talked about in the scriptures. I think that's wrong, because you can't be a Christian wife beater. You can't. You cannot hit your spouse and claim to have the love of God in your heart. You can't be a wife who hits her husband and is physically violent towards her husband and claim to have the love of God in your heart. So I would argue that Paul directly addresses this, that you are free to leave in an abusive situation. The scriptures doesn't say that you must say, and I think it's terrible exegesis that pastors in the past have argued that point. In situations like this, if you're in an abusive situation, my first counsel to you is always get out and get to safety. It's impossible to work on your marriage when you don't feel safe. But that doesn't mean you should run to the divorce attorney. But you can maybe work on reconciliation. But I need you to hear me. There is zero biblical command, as some have claimed in the past, to stay in an abusive relationship. That person does not have the love of God in their heart, especially if they won't submit to the elders in the church. The truth is, with divorce, each situation is complex. It's full of human emotions, anger, fear, lies, and so much more. I say this for you to hear because I want you to build a theology of marriage, because this is a complex topic in which Jesus and the entire body of scriptures think on it. And it's to show you that divorce is not a black and white topic when it comes to the scriptures. So I think that the scriptures and our general position as Christians must be that divorces should be rare and over the worst of covenantal type breaking behaviors. But we'd be lying if we said the scriptures don't allow for it. And as I was praying through this message, I began to think, okay, what does this text say to married folks in the room? And here's maybe how we all can build a better theology of marriage, because you're going to have people in your life that are going through this and are struggling. What does God think of these things? So now hopefully you have at least a better grid to think through. What does God think about these things? Where are the scriptures that I can go read them for myself? 1 Corinthians 7, Mark 10. Jesus speaks on it in Matthew as well. But what, if anything, I pray, does this text have to say to divorced folks in this room? I suspect whether in this room or watching online, where sometimes up to 200 people watch a sermon, there are folks who know in their heart, who are hearing what I said, who know in their heart that they didn't give their marriage covenant what they should have. I've had people say to me in counseling, if I could go back, I would do it differently because I don't think I honored the Lord properly in my first marriage. So, I want you to hear me clearly when I say that the grace of God is still for you. You may need to repent. I don't know. You may need to do a bunch of work before God. But please hear me when I say divorce is not some unforgivable sin. Everyone in this room has an area of their life that they need grace and mercy for God to come into. Everyone in this room has serious things before their Lord that they knew they have done in their past that they wish they could do differently now with where their heart is before God. You can be a robust follower of Jesus and leader in his church if you've been divorced. But that doesn't mean that God might still not want to teach you something about yourself as you walk through it. So for some, your response to today might be to go before God and to continue to just work on your heart before him. For some, there might be an opportunity at reconciliation. We have a couple in this church, I won't say their name, but they have been divorced and remarried by the grace of God. And I think that's an amazing thing. For some, there might be an opportunity at reconciliation, but the truth is, I know that as some of you who are divorced, if you called your ex on the phone today as you walked out of church and said, hey, crazy idea, my pastor said we should get back together, you would hear the kind of laughter that is only reserved for nightclubs. Let's be honest, it takes two to tango when it comes to marriage, and if you tried to say, hey, I've just got this crazy idea, and for some of you, your current spouse will be really uncomfortable with that phone call, right? So reconciliation might be something that you're able to do by the grace of God, but it'll be a case-by-case basis. So mostly for today, I think it's about learning and growth. The marriages most likely to fail are people who have been married before. And it may sound harsh to say it like this, but the reason we see second marriages fail at a more than 50% rate and third marriages fail at 70%, if you get married for a third time, it's 7 and 10 are going to end up in divorce. And the reason is this: you know where the emergency exit is and you're not afraid to use it. And that's harsh to say, but the statistics bear it out. I've done it before. I can do it again. So I hope what you hear today is if you enter into another marriage, go into it with a different mindset. Go into it with a covenantal mindset where you work with your partner to ensure that Christ is at the center of your relationship. And remember, I hope you hear clearly today that divorce doesn't make you somehow damaged goods, somehow less loved by God, or somehow less valuable in the church. It doesn't mean even that you'll never have another happy marriage in your life, that you won't find fulfillment in that way. We have people in this church who have walked through hellacious divorces and have found a new, God-honoring marriage on the other side. So don't lose hope. Don't believe the lies of Satan. But church, overall, if we want to embrace what God has called us to, we must change the way we look at marriage. We must radically commit ourselves to being first and foremost to God in covenant, and then to our spouse in covenant. We must remind ourselves that it will not always be sunshine and roses. That is life. The best marriage is, on its best day, still two sinners trying to make it work out together. Divorce isn't the only option. The truth is, it shouldn't be the first at the very minimum. Kneeling before the cross by yourself or with your spouse and crying out to God ought to be number one. Lord, change me, change this situation, change this reality, and seeing what God does and believing in God in a huge way. When you and your spouse know that neither of you is going anywhere, it actually makes it a lot easier to work on your marriage. Because if you know you're stuck with one another, you might as well redecorate a bit. You might as well fix things up a bit. Because you're all you got. And God will walk with you in that. The church will walk with you in that. And I hope today, my challenge to you is that you would desire to have a marriage, whether in the future, if you're single currently, or today if you're married, that reclaims a bit of Eden and brings it right back in to your home, where God saw that it was not good for man to be alone and gave the man woman, that they should no longer be two but become one in front of him. Let's pray as the worship team comes forward. God, I know that so many in this room, or many in this room, have walked through very, very difficult and bitter and challenging divorces, and I pray that you would be with them now, that you would help their hearts to heal, and that you would help them to feel your love, your grace, your mercy. Lord, that you bring discipline where discipline is needed, but that you would bring grace upon grace in all situations, that you would help them to see their value and worth, and I pray that they would recommit to you, that should they enter into another marriage, that they will do so radically different. And I pray for the couples in this room who are barely hanging on by a thread. I pray that they would hear from you, see you, that they would walk towards you together. God, that divorce would become not an option, so that they would walk towards you, hand in hand, two sinners needing desperate grace and mercy. God, it is a humbling thing to be married. And I pray you would give each of us grace to follow you the best we can. Be with us as we continue to worship you through song. For it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.